Early morning on Holy Thursday, women throughout Greece start making Easter bread to be eaten Easter morning. This delicious bread is highly symbolic of the Christian Easter tradition. For example, the braid represents the Trinity and the red dyed eggs, the blood of Christ. To make this easy Greek Easter bread, you'll need 2½ cups of white flour, 1½ teaspoons of dried yeast, 1/4 cup of warm water, 1/4 cup of sugar, 3/4 cup of milk, 4 tablespoons of melted butter, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 beaten egg, 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract, an assortment of hard-boiled dyed eggs. As always with yeast bread, you need to start by proofing your yeast. 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1½ teaspoons of dry yeast, 1/4 cup of warm water, and stir it around and put it aside for 5 to 10 minutes until it blooms. While your yeast is blooming, warm your milk on the stove top to a gentle simmer. You'll start to see your bubbles form around the edges of your milk, and now it's time to add the butter to melt it in with the milk. And you'll also add your salt and your remaining sugar at this time, and using a whisk, keeping it on flame, just stir it, dissolving the sugar and melting the butter. Once the butter is melted, we'll put this aside for 5 minutes to cool before we add it to the yeast mixture, and then we'll add the flour. So our nicely proofed yeast mixture is now going into the cooled milk mixture. The milk is still warm. You'll know it's right when you can touch it. It feels warm, but it doesn't feel hot. And then you're also going to stir in your 1 beaten egg at this time. This is the time that you add your 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract. And now this mixture is poured into the flour. And we're looking for a soft dough. Turn your soft dough out on a lightly floured board, and using your pastry tool, just start flipping it and kneading it, and this will take about 5 to 10 minutes until it forms into a nice smooth ball. Once your dough has formed into a nice smooth ball, place it in a prepared greased bowl and cover it and put it aside to double in size about an hour and a half. Dough is nicely risen. I punched it down and divided it into 3 equal parts, and now I'm just rolling each of the equal parts into a long 12-inch, 14-inch rope, which I will then place on a baking sheet. And the next step is to braid it. I'm just doing a very loose braid on this, taking the ends and tucking the ends under. Once braided, it needs to be put aside for another 2 hours to continue rising before baking. Our bread has risen for an additional 2 hours, and now I'm adding an egg wash to the top of the bread. An egg wash is an egg yolk mixed with about 1 teaspoon of water. Just brushing it around the bread. And now this will go into a preheated 350-degree oven for about 35 minutes. Our beautiful bread is out of the oven and a beautiful golden brown. Traditional recipes call for the eggs to be baked into the bread, but the dye will run and can get into the bread itself. My Greek friend taught me the trick of, after the bread is cool, carve a hole in it and then place your eggs into the hole. This bread is much like a French brioche. It is a delightfully sweet bread that can be made and enjoyed year-round, but it's always a favorite on Easter morning.